Hi, I'm Walter Silva. My colleagues and customers in the mechanical design community are familiar with my series of Dr. Walt's books on CAD Key Creator, SolidWorks, and Solid Edge. I've also spent time with many of you in my CAD training classes and providing technical support and webinars on CAD Key and Key Creator. One of my lifelong hobbies is model railroading. In February of 1971, I started construction on my Funchal and New Lisbon HO scale model railroad. Over half a century has passed since then, and the railroad continues to grow. Welcome to an exciting short tour of this miniature world that I have created. Many of you might think of model trains as a small circle of track with a few buildings on a 4x8 table during the holidays. This railroad takes up a basement space of 20 by 30 feet with massive bridges and mountains. A long double-track main line runs between the cities of New Lisbon and Funchal. Along the way, we pass through many smaller towns. You'll notice the town names are Portuguese in honor of my paternal grandparents who emigrated to the U.S. 125 years ago. New Lisbon contains dozens of buildings and a backdrop built up of building pictures from many model kit catalogs. You'll also notice the cut stone walls that we'll talk about later on in this video. The sedimentary rock strata in this picture are created using broken pieces of ceiling tile. They are then glued together in layers, carved, and colored to get the effect. Many of the structures on my layout are built from scratch from basswood, cardboard, and plywood. Melanie's Art Institute is a typical example. The shingles are made from strips of colored cardboard, and there are close to 1,000 of them on the roof of this house. The treehouse is another example of a structure built from basswood strips. Just outside of New Lisbon, the double-track main line crosses over the spectacular Casado Gorge. The rockwork in this section plunges from the ceiling almost to the floor. The waterfalls are created using braided fishing line coated with 40 coats of decoupage sealant. Tragedies sometimes occur on model railroads. A few weeks ago, one of the locomotives pulling a train over this bridge decided to leave the tracks. After a 5-foot fall to the concrete floor, that single locomotive wound up being 4 dozen pieces of garbage. Oh well. We take things a little bit slower now when we go over these high bridges. Watching a train travel over the spectacular Casado Gorge is a real treat. This is part of the thrill of having a model railroad of this size. For a railroad of this size, it's not just scenery that takes up time. The power requirements and distribution to the different track segments requires a major investment in wiring, switches, and layout. The main control panel is set up so that every 10-foot section of track can be isolated as a separate segment for testing purposes. Circuit breakers protect every 10 blocks of track, and switches switch off every 5 blocks of track. This makes it easy to troubleshoot potential short circuits caused during fabricating new structures or landscaping. A tremendous amount of work goes into the unseen support structure of a model railroad. I build a sub-road bed for all of the track by ripping 1x8 pine into 4-foot lath strips, 1/8 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch in cross-section. I then glue them up like flowing butcher block to create an extremely stable foundation. After using a belt sander to smooth the top surface, cork roadbed is attached with glue. Code 100 flex track is then spiked to the roadbed. The smooth flowing track results in hassle-free running of trains. Let's continue along our journey toward Funchal. The double-track main line runs for 30 feet along the front wall of this basement space. Along the way, we'll pass the town of Estremoz. On either side, tracks branch off and climb to the mountain branch of the railroad. The close-up picture to the right shows the double slip switch that can reroute trains to either track. The Lubricite Mining Company near Estremoz generates heavy ore traffic to both New Lisbon and the Funchal Industrial Park. The Lubricite Mine Works is built from scratch. The center picture shows the initial rough construction. On the left is midway through detailing, and on the right is the final detailed result. After passing Estremoz, we enter the small town of Barcelos, home of Nemo's fish cannery. This is another structure that I built completely from scratch. There are over 1,000 hand-cut roof shingles on this structure. This total project took 65 hours. The split stream and waterfalls at Montesinos are spectacular. I had a lot of fun building this scene. Just as we enter the outskirts of Montesinos, we see Poets in Glass. This is in recognition of our Uncle Albert and Cousin Maurice Poet, who were brilliant stained glass artisans. This is another structure that was built completely from scratch. As we enter Funchal, the double-track main line divides as it passes under the long steel trestle carrying the mountain line. The additional passing siding on the right helps avoid congestion when switching cars into the large yard at the Funchal Industrial Complex. Funchal itself is a sleepy little town with many ornate buildings. These are built from precise German modeling kits from Vollmer, Kibri, and Fowler. Lonnie's bike shop is a tribute to my father-in-law and his lifelong hobby rebuilding bicycles. The Pabst Credit Union on the outskirts of Funchal is a tribute to my dad who helped start it. Down the road a bit is Walt's Woodworking. For more than a decade, I ran this business in my younger days. These two buildings are also examples of scratch-built models with individual roof shingles. Palos Verdes Canyon is another area where the scenery soars from near the basement floor to the ceiling. The cascading waterfalls create a great backdrop for the two lines of steel trestles that carry both the main line and the mountain line across the chasm. John's boatyard lies at the base of the waterfalls. John Lang is our next-door neighbor at the Jersey Shore. He knows more about boats than anyone else I've ever met. Watching trains cross at 2 levels across the canyon is a real treat. In this shot, I stalled the engine at the top, carrying the coal tipples from a local mine, while the streamlined freight moves across the lower trestle. On our way back to New Lisbon, we passed through the town of Mirandela. When our local utility ran new gas mains and moved meters outside, a prime real estate spot was created. Wasting no time, I built this scene to take advantage of this area. I included a construction project in process at the top stories of this building. Traveling through the town of Estremadura, we passed this scene. I created the chain link fence using tulle sprayed with aluminum colored paint. The cat on the top of the fence rail and the roses on the bushes are just two examples of the minute details I add to every scene on this railroad. Along this stretch, we pass under the Estremadura High Line. This long stretch of highway crosses over several bridges that soar over the railroad below. Nearing the outskirts of New Lisbon, we see the New Lisbon Holstein Hospice, Vincent Silva, director. At Rutgers Cook College, he raised a Holstein calf in the ag program. On his last visit to New Jersey before his untimely death, he placed the 16 cows that are in this scene. Carved stone walls appear all over my layout. Every stone on every wall is individually carved using hobby knives. I use high-density foam and a sharp knife to get this done. This makes a much more realistic scene than just painting stonework. The massive Da Silva viaduct is the most extreme example of this carved stone technique. I spent over 4 months one summer at a shore house creating the entire viaduct and canyon scene. The scene is built in 3 separate sections because of their size. These sections were then transferred in 3 separate trips to North Jersey for installation on the layout. The Castle da Silva, located above the Viaduct Gorge, was another summer project. The large cylindrical tower was constructed by gluing pine lath strips around the circumference of a large cardboard tube, kind of like the barrel staves that you see on a barrel. I then sanded the wood surface and carved. The flat walls are also soft pine. I then carved those 1 block at a time. Each window frame was carved from several pieces of basswood. My engine terminal has a 16-inch turntable. That's 116 scale feet. It can handle the largest locomotives on my roster. The roof is clear acrylic, so visitors can appreciate the internal detail. A future project is to add computerized indexing for the turntable. The old quarter of New Lisbon was built in 1971 at the start of this half-century project. This is the only section built on a fiberboard base. Since then, I've built most of my modules on high-density foam. It's a lot easier to plant trees and bushes in the foam than it is in the high-density fiberboard. I've gathered some layout statistics to give you an idea of the scope of this project. During the next few years, several dozen additional structures are planned, including 2 large mine complexes. Cinders along the right-of-way have been added for most of the railroad, and ballasting for the entire track line will take up at least 1.5 years in the future. Thank you for taking this tour of my railroad. I hope you've enjoyed the experience. You can reach me at docwaltbooks1@gmail.com. May the trains be with you.